decentralized revolution, if people's power can bring successful results amid all repression in dictatorial countries, should their power work even better and quicker in democratic countries or next in a special country? George, India is the world's largest democracy, and yet, despite great dissatisfaction from many walks of Indian lives, the people have not been able to collect for protests or generate a revolution. I mean, they don't protest collectively. I mean, they are so fragmented. Are they less determined to shape their destiny when you compare that with the current revolution in Kerala?
Well, I think the circumstances are radically different. You have a democratic structure to governance in India that really didn't exist in Egypt. There was a framework in Egypt, but you had such autocratic rule that the people were disconnected. I'm not sure there's that sense of disconnection in India, despite a lot of shortcomings in the political process. I see a lot more fragmentation as well, culturally, along religious lines in India. So I don't see the same kind of cultural cohesion that you'd have in Egypt necessarily. So it's a very different set of circumstances. I would sooner see some regional discontent organized around distinct cultural groups within India, and we've seen those over the last 40, 50 years. We've seen a number of uprisings that have been put down. So those, if you want, you might refer to those as failed revolutions or nascent revolutions that were extinguished early in the process. So the process is very different. And by the way, as far as Egypt, I think it's too soon to call that a revolution. It's definitely an uprising against the existing political order. But we don't know if they're going to take down those existing institutions in Egypt or just replace the leadership. We have no idea yet. It will take time before we can make those kinds of distinctions. But India is vast territorially, demographically, and culturally very, very much more diverse than
Dr. Ansari, they have not been able, the people in India, to rise up collectively, organize against a weak judiciary, against decades-old corruption. How do you determine, is there a lack of willpower on the part of people, or do you think?
I don't think there's a lack of the willpower. The structure in India is totally different. You mentioned about the judiciary, very corrupt. I mean, victims are put in the jail and the criminals are free. I mean, I can give examples after examples. Crime against the minorities, especially against the Sikhs, untouchables, Muslims, and the Christians. This is not something that has happened once in a while. It has been happening for a long time. In India, you judge. For example, let us say if I lead the Muslims to rebel against the government, I expect very little support from our Hindu friends to bring the revolution, because I am looked at it as a Muslim and not as an Indian. Same thing can be said about the Muslims. I think till look at this Egyptian revolution, 10% Coptic Christians, they never brought the religious issue at all. They were all united, they were all Egyptian. I think once India, the people will think that we are Indian first, and we need to work on the common cause. I can tell you that this kind of revolution actually has been long overdue for India, and it will happen hopefully soon.
Dr. Singh, lack of national identity, how do you read that?
I agree with what Dr. Ansari said, that on one hand, there is no common glue. Religion plays a major role than caste system and different minorities. Last time we have seen the collective demonstrations of change on the Indians was in the 70s during the Indira Gandhi regime, when the election was upset by the Allahabad High Court. And that was, at that time they had one charismatic leader like Jayaprakash Narayan, who was from the pre-freedom era, and he started with the total revolution concept. that made a change. Indira Gandhi clamped emergency, took away the civil liberties, put thousands of people into jail. And after that, elections were held. Indira Gandhi was defeated. Opposition came, but the opposition couldn't deliver as per the expectations of the people. At this time, there is a lot of freedom of media as far as the electronic media goes. We are seeing a couple of stories on Indian corruption in judiciary, in 2G spectrum, in housing, in other stuff and all. We have seen one demonstration 3 days ago, but that was organized by 8 different workers' organizations which have towards the leftist leaning. But I think the way unemployment is rising there, the farmers are committing suicide. It may be in different parts of the country. Different sections may come up with their own thing, and at some point they may join. But certainly there is no word India, as we say that it is a British colonial map making under which they have brought northeastern tribes and others together. So that is why there is no common identity as Indian there.
If certain officials in India steal more than $8 billion and put it in a Swiss bank, that is equivalent to country's half of its GDP. And on the other end of the spectrum, you have these farmers committing suicide because of the government's policy, whatever. Why is this inequality not provoking the victims to organize mass protests in a country that has a population of roughly 1 billion?
This is a fascinating question, and I think George touched on one possible explanation to that. In democratic societies, and India is a democratic society, or at least has many of the elements of functioning democracy, there are many safety valves for protest. There are elections, there are political parties, there's a press which can operate, the press and media, and there's some freedom of assembly. And in India, there may be just enough safety valve release from these elements to prevent political protest from boiling up in an explosive manner internally. I don't know, but in countries which did not allow those things, such as Libya, for instance, you can see how it builds up and it affects the whole country. India somehow seems to have escaped that, and it may be the system it has allows just enough release to keep it under control.
Yeah, I would agree with that, plus the fact that I think reform in India is going to have to take place somehow, something like how it takes place in the United States. You have to do it through elections, through the media, through political parties that make pressure, but it's not going to be a mass uprising by the people because there's not enough of a tipping point. There's not a mass of people who all coalesce and agree on one objection that they have with the government. They're too dispersed. So it'll have to be gradual, with education, with more informed populace, with less corrupt officials. So it may take decades.
Dr. Singh, enough safety valves and no tipping point. Is that the major weakness why people in India have not been able to organize protests on a mass scale and collectively?
Actually, during the break time, this question came that I think look at the Indian history itself. Almost 800 plus years of slavery from different points of views, 200 years of British colonial rule. And in spite of that, India has democratic institutions, parliament, legislature, and judiciary. But still the fact remains that in the last 64 years, Indian states have killed more of its citizens, in inner insurgency, than British colonial rulers in 200 years. It may be Sikhs in Punjab, Muslims in Kashmir, Christians in Nagaland and Manipur. So in spite of its institutions and so-called safety valves, still India has used military with impunity to crush whenever any singular agitation has come up for their civil rights and for their civil demands. But in spite of all that, I hope that as with this new information technology, a new middle class has emerged. And certainly in the coming months, if not weeks, we will certainly see the way Indian society, and particularly on the top echelons of power, are turning corrupt and different scandals. Certainly we will see the big demonstrations, protests, and an urge for a change in the system.
Let me have George in. George, if the army, the military does not play a vital role in checking the excesses of the government, and if the police cooperates with the government, any revolution can fail. Would you say that?
Yeah. The population is generally disarmed. They don't have the benefit of our Second Amendment here in the United States. So all of the arms, all of the means to suppress any kind of revolt are in the hands of the government, absolutely. As far as the role of the military, our perspective from here is always that it's there to protect the nation, the interests of the nation as a whole, the borders. I don't know whether that ethos is instilled in the Indian Army. I presume it is. I've certainly seen it deployed in cases where threats from Pakistan have originated. But I personally don't recall instances of the military being used internally. Certainly there's a vital police force that is an arm of the state that does repress people, suppress people in opposition. But that's true of police forces all over the world. So I don't see that India is necessarily distinct.
Today, the whole of Northeast, 7 states of India are under military occupation. In Kashmir, there are 700,000 Indian Army troops, the largest concentration of army anywhere in the world. That is how they are governing the country.
Dr. Ansari, do you think the success of the Egyptian revolution is due to the fact that army and police remain neutral, and judiciary is well active and is well reformed in Egypt compared to other countries like China, Burma, and places, and they are still fighting?
One of the fact about India is that something it has, for example, a lot of the Indians are very pessimistic. I am a little different breed. I would revolt against anybody who does the injustice to me. But the people think that it was in our Qismat, our fortune, and that's what God decided. This philosophy has to change. Regarding the education, India has one of the most educated workforce, engineers, scientists, doctors. So lack of education is not the point over there. Second thing is that we have seen this thing, the military is used whenever there is a riot. One of our panelists, Dr. Barwa, who is untouchable, he used to say, and he's very right, the largest gangs of criminals are Indian police. And fanatic Hindus have infiltrated not only the police, but now they have infiltrated the military.